Hello, Emily here from Homemade Emily Jane. Welcome to week 4 of the Stratus Quilt Sew Along. I am so excited to have you here with me today. If you are just now joining, make sure you go back and check out week 1 of the Stratus Sew Along. Start there. Find that video here on my YouTube channel. And then I've also got videos for weeks 2 and 3 as well to check out. So for week 4, this is our final week of the Stratus Quilt Sew Along, and we will be turning our quilt blocks into a pieced quilt top. But before I begin talking about how to make your Stratus quilt, I want to remind you about the grand prize for the Sew Along. We have some really cool prizes throughout the Sew Along, but the grand prize this week, I'm going to pick a winner for the Husqvarna Viking H Class 20 sewing machine. This sewing machine is an easy to use, lightweight machine, perfect for travel, so you can bring it with you to your next quilting retreat or class. If you are just now joining, I want to remind you to make sure that you grab the Stratus quilt pattern from my shop, and I will put a link to the pattern in the description below. All right, so who's ready to start making their Stratus quilts? So I've got here my Stratus quilt blocks. So we made these blocks last week during week 3 of the Sew Along, and you should have your stack of blocks. They might be ombre like mine, from one color to a different color from light to dark, or maybe yours are scrappy scattered. If yours are scrappy, then make sure to just make them entirely as scattered as you want and put them in a random stack. If they're ombre, keep them organized because we will want them organized when we start our layout. In addition to our quilt blocks, we will also need our sashing and borders. So your small sashing strips we already cut out during week 2 of the Sew Along, and then we had very long pieces of sashing and borders as well that we can actually piece together today if you haven't yet. So what you'll do is you'll take all of those strips and then sew them together into one super long strip, which is what I have here. And then you can trim them to the sizes written in the pattern, or I'm gonna cheat a little bit and I'm gonna wait to trim as I'm going. The hesitation with waiting to trim is that sometimes your quilt can end up a little wonky and wavy. So if you're new to quilting, you might want to trim before you start sewing. I've been quilting for a long time, and I know personally I like it better when I wait to trim. So that's what I'm going to do. I have one super long strip here, and I'll sew it as I get going. Now that we have our quilt blocks and our sashing, we're ready to start our layout. If you are doing the scrappy scattered version of the Stratus quilt, then you can go ahead and lay out your blocks however you want. But one thing I like to do is rotate from horizontal lines to vertical lines with each block to add some movement and variety in the pattern. You don't have to if you don't want to, but that's the way I did it. And if you're doing the ombre version, I'm here to help you. I'm going to show you how I do my layout on my design wall. If you have a design wall, use that. If not, you could use a bed or even the floor to lay out all your blocks to see where they'll go before you start sewing them together. It's time to start planning our layout for our Stratus quilt blocks. So I have here my blocks stacked in ombre order and my design wall, which is adhered to the wall of my sewing room, and it is a piece of cork. It's about a 1/4 inch wide cork, and then covered in flannel. The flannel makes the blocks stick to it. So that's what I use for my design wall, and then my husband put this wooden border around it just to frame it out, make it look a little bit nicer. So, got my blocks, I've got my design wall. I'm gonna start with the color 1 and 2 combination, the 2 darkest colors, and I'm going to start putting them in one corner. But I want you to notice I'm going to rotate my strips. So the first block might be up and down, and then the one next to it would be sideways. So I'll start here in this corner and we'll go up and down. And I'm starting in the very corner because I can only reach so high on this design wall. So the block next to it, I'll go ahead and put sideways. I'm not going to leave room for the sashing on this, but there will be sashing in between the blocks. And then, so once I have 2 across, I'm going to go ahead and put one up. And then we're going to use all of this color that we have. All right. You'll notice here that I'm going a little bit taller than I am wide, and that's because the quilt is taller than it is wide. So I'm not going to do a perfect, like every row we're going to increment. We're going to kind of scatter it in and kind of work more up than across, at least towards the beginning. So then we're going to find our Next set of colors, so I've got 2 solid oranges, and I'm going to put those on next. All right, so you'll see I have those set up. We'll go ahead and grab our next section, and you'll see we just kind of repeat this process, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. We're just gonna put them up there and see how it looks and move them if we don't love it. Once you've laid out all your blocks how you think you want them to go ahead and take a step back and look at it, and maybe even take a picture and put it in black and white and see if the ombre is what you thought it would be. Once you've decided on your final layout, make sure you take a picture of your blocks. You can use that photo to reference later to make sure that you have the blocks in the same order that you want them. Once we have them, go ahead and grab your sashing strips. We are now going to take the blocks off the wall and start sewing the sashing in between the blocks. And the way I do that is I leave this last row on the design wall, but I take all of the other rows down and stack them in order, and then can sit at my sewing machine and chain sew the sashing onto the blocks. You repeat that process for each section of each row until you have all of your rows made. And then you add your long sashing strips in between to make the quilt top. Once you're done with all of the sashing in between, you just add your 4 borders and then you're done. Once you get started, you'll see it's really quite easy. The way I'm doing it, I take all my blocks down off the wall in the order that they're on there, and then I pay attention to which side the sashing is supposed to be sewn onto, and then I'm going to go sit at my sewing machine and sew these 2 stacks together. When I'm done sewing, I'm going to press towards the sashing because I find that easiest, and then I'm going to repeat that process until we have a quilt top. I'd like to share a quick tip as you are joining your rows together. So once you have your sashing in between and you're getting ready to sew the 2 rows together, go ahead and put them right sides together and grab your pins. And we're gonna pin them in place, but I'm gonna start at the middle of each row and line up the seams from the one row with the seams of the other. So you're gonna feel, or if you're using a light colored sashing, you might be able to see through it, but you can use feel to see where the seams are and line those up, and then go ahead and pin it in place. And then we'll do that all the way along the rows to make sure that they are lined up correctly. I hope these tips help you as you are making your Stratus quilt tops. Be sure to drop a comment below if you have any questions, or reach out to me directly on email or Instagram. I'm always here to help. Once you finish piecing your quilt top, be sure to take a photo of it before you start quilting and post the photo to Instagram with hashtag Stratus SAL to be entered to win this week's prizes for the Stratus Sew Along. I can't wait to see your beautiful Stratus quilts. Happy sewing!